Hi, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. I'm filling in for Sam Roberts. The tension along the Ukrainian-Russian border still dominates the news. As things stand today, as we're taping on Wednesday, there is no conflict. But what's to come? Well, only Vladimir Putin seems to know. Closer to home, the United States recently went through its own border pains, this time to the north, with the Ambassador Bridge being closed for a few days as a result of pandemic restriction protesters in Canada. And while some protesters were removed, what might this type of grassroots movement foretell for future protests, even leading up to the 2024 presidential election? And the other potent piece of news, certainly for those of us here this week, is that a federal jury and a federal judge have both rejected Sarah Palin's lawsuit against the New York Times. For 50 years, the paper of record, as some like to call it, has fended off any libel lawsuit filed against it. What does this dismissal foretell for freedom of the press? What does it mean for any sort of change? Joining me to discuss this week is the New York Times contributing writer Eleanor Randolph, and welcome back. We're back in the studio, Eleanor, for the first time.
I know, it's nice to see you in person.
I know,
Clyde.
Without a mask. Thank you. This is great. I feel normally the round table is a little bit more than just two people, but it's you and me. I feel it's like my dinner with Andre. You know, we're gonna
Andrea.
In this case, Andrea, indeed. Let me start with the Palin lawsuit against our newspaper. I'm going to assume she's going to appeal, and I also assume her appeal is going to be rejected. She has a very tall hill to climb on this one. But the significance, this is a significant case, and why do you think this is? I think I have a few reasons of my own.
For one thing, she has plenty of money to actually file a lawsuit against the New York Times.
Is it hers, or?
Well, you know, it comes from.
Yeah.
But the important thing really is that a public figure has a very, very hard time that's proving libel. And, you know, she would have had to prove malice on the part of the New York Times editorial board. And they were wrong in this editorial. They made a mistake. But malice is another hurdle. And it just didn't even, you know, to most people, it just didn't look like malice. They, you know, apologized. They, you know, they corrected it. They did all those things. Now, I mean, she can appeal it, but I don't think she'll get very far. I mean, her only hope is to file the lawsuit in England, and the libel law in England is much harder on news organizations than it is here.
The operative case here, for those who may not be familiar with it, is New York Times v. Sullivan. Sullivan was in effect, the police chief in Montgomery, Alabama, and there was a newspaper ad taken out by a bunch of civil rights leaders and affiliates. It was an ad in the New York Times. It wasn't even something that the New York Times wrote. It was an advertisement, full page, and it never even named Sullivan, but it had some errors in it, and he felt he had been abused, and so he went to court and won in lower courts, lost at the Supreme Court. This case, which, as we've been discussing, has held now for half a century, more, is now under great assault. Both Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch are on record as saying they'd like to revisit it. Is there a case likely to come down the pike at some point, maybe not necessarily involving the Times, that will weaken the press freedoms that have existed for 60-odd years?
Well, with this court, I mean, 50 years ago, we had a very, very different Supreme Court, as you know. Sure. If you know, who knows if Sarah Palin can get this all the way to the Supreme Court? She's who knows how they will. What they seem to be talking about is some form of punishment for news organizations whenever they get anything wrong. If you look around the world, there are all these, you know, like in Turkey and Hungary and certainly in Russia, there are ways that these leaders have undermined the media And you know, the great fear is that if, say, Trump takes over, he finds a way to do what some of those leaders have done.
Yeah.
You know, going after the business side of a news organization, or or just locking people up. You know, I mean, this could be a very fragile right in this country.
Yeah, maybe. Turning to local politics and the mayor, does Eric Adams have an honesty issue that needs to be dealt with? It's nothing major per se, but these small items begin, for me anyway, to add up. Is it important whether he's a vegan or he eats fish? No, but he's not been straight about it. He's not been straight about some of his tax stuff. He wasn't straight for a while even of where he lived, whether he was in Brooklyn or in New Jersey.
I was wondering where he's living now.
And I'm not even sure, frankly. And I know he takes umbrage at these kinds of questions and acts as if no previous mayor had ever been asked such questions. But is there a legitimate concern about who is this guy?
Well, you know, going back, his history is as in the state Senate, there were real questions about how he operated there, and there's the one thing. There's a kind of arrogance about him that he makes it seem that he can do almost anything. Now, his answer to what we've been talking about is to say that he's perfectly imperfect. I mean, it almost sounds like Mary Poppins. You know, Mary Poppins said, "I'm practically perfect in every way," and so we've got our mayor talking about being perfectly imperfect. Well, I mean, okay, we're all imperfect, but he's the mayor, and they're just, if he slips and slides too much, he's going to get in big trouble.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I'm also a bit concerned. He injected race into this a couple of days ago, saying that he might even refuse to take questions from reporters except on the topic that that's at hand for him, and sort of suggested that he's being dealt with unfairly because he's black and a lot of the press corps is white. Now, this is not the first time that he has done this. During the campaign, he accused two of his opponents who linked up under this ranked choice voting system that we have, Catherine Garcia and Andrew Yang, of attempted voter suppression. Now, that's a loaded charge. It was purely tactical on their part. They were trying to be mayor themselves. Again, obviously there is racism in our world, but I don't see it in regard to him. I mean, this strikes me as an unfair tactic that he's resorting to.
Well, the real problem is that because there is real racism, you know, using that about the press is crazy. I mean, for example, our editorial board, the representative who covers City Hall, Maya Gay, is a black woman. And you have plenty of Hispanics, and you know, there are even some white men covering City Hall these days. And the thing that you have to realize is that everybody in power hates the press.
Of course.
You know,
he's just not being singularly picked on. I mean, that's
right.
for sure. I mean,
That's right. We pick on everybody.
De Blasio caught heat just for the way he ate pizza. You know, I mean, it's what kind of way is that for a guy with an Italian name?
They all try to limit the questions to the subject they want to talk about.
That's not the way it works.
That's just natural.
We're airing on Friday, unfortunately taping on Wednesday. Presumably on Thursday, Governor Kathy Hochul will be nominated by the Democratic Party as the candidate. Is she a shoo-in? I mean, plain and simple. Obviously, she has opponents in the primary, including Jumaane Williams, the city public advocate, and Tom Suozzi out in Long Island. But are they running uphill?
They are, I think. I mean, this primary is early. It's in June. And so this will happen very quickly. A lot of the establishment, Democratic Party establishment, has gotten behind Hochul. I mean, and she has a sort of, I don't know, perfect position in some ways. You've got Tom Suozzi, Congressman Suozzi, sort of on the right for the Democratic Party, and Jumaane Williams sort of on the left, and she's got this center lane. And the truth of the matter is that, I mean, Eric Adams was more a centrist candidate. Biden was a that lane is very useful. The real question I have about this election is the Republican. And, you know, because it is such a Democratic legislature, I just wonder, people, you know, voters often like to have a balance of, you know, and so I would watch that Republican candidate very carefully, whoever it is.
Right. Speaking of the legislature, they seem resistant to Mayor Adams's appeals for changing the bail laws and sort of reverting to the status quo ante and allowing some pretty bad guys to be locked up for a while. This, you know Albany a lot better than I do. I mean, they're quite resistant to this, aren't they?
I know. I think, personally, I mean, this is a personal view, I think that the legislature could change that bail law so that you'd give judges more freedom to determine whether or not the defendant was really, really dangerous. I mean, most other states have some version of that. The federal government has some version of that. The bail was very, very, very unfair, and everybody who really looked at it knew it. But you need some latitude for a judge to keep somebody who's dangerous off the streets.
And what happens when you have some murders, some really particularly horrific, not all murders are equal, I know that doesn't sound right, but some just horrified people more than others. We just had when a guy stabbed a woman 40 times in her apartment. We had that poor woman shoved to the tracks by a guy who's clearly insane. Does that galvanize the forces who want to revert again to where we were on bail, or not really? Yeah,
I think so. Especially the murder in Chinatown was really horrific.
It was.
The woman who was pushed on the tracks, that was a sort of crazy homeless person.
It was,
and
yeah.
That's sort of a different problem that I don't know how anybody's going to solve that one, but it would surely be great if somebody would. But I think there's a lot of pressure now, and there's a lot of pressure from the Republicans, certainly, to change that bail law. And the difficulty for Democrats will be to change it just a little to give judges this power and not just throw it out the window.
So are Democratic lawmakers basically way to the left of Democratic executives, be it Biden at the federal level, Adams at the local level, Hochul at the state level? And
it's a
is there
very
an inherent tension?
It's a very progressive legislature now. You know, the Senate, the state Senate is really dominated by progressives. I mean, it's been so many years when the Republicans and Cuomo and Pataki, you know, have run the state in a very basically middle of the road to very, very conservative way. So these state senators, all of whom got elected just 2 and 4 years ago, they really think they're making amends for all these years when the Republicans ran everything.
Yeah. We literally only have half a minute. Does Andrew Cuomo have a political future of any sort? He's been cleared, basically, of the
Never
criminal
write
charges.
him out. Remember? Never, 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 never.
That is true. He was written out when he bowed out again
And he
years ago.
ran against Carl McCall.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, he'll...
9
right.
lives.
Yes, at least, at least. Okay, well, we'll see. More to come on that. Thanks to Eleanor Randolph. Next up, we're going to talk about health mandates and President Biden. Welcome back. Pandemic mask mandates are being lifted to varying degrees around the country. Here in New York City, the state has lifted some mandates, but federal and local mandates remain in effect for transportation, schools, theaters, and other places. The Biden administration is proceeding cautiously, and the head of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, urges caution still. Connected to this, the Biden administration is also suffering from a lack of leadership in some key science and health agencies in Washington. Just recently, the president's science advisor, Dr. Eric Lander, resigned, putting a pandemic preparedness plan in jeopardy, at least for now. What does it mean both politically and for American citizens in general? Sheryl Gay Stolberg, health policy correspondent for The Times, has been covering all of this, and she joins us from Washington. Welcome, Sheryl. Thank you for joining us. Where have the varying rules affecting COVID at this point, wear the mask, no, don't wear the mask, wear it here, don't wear it there, has it just simply gotten too many people confused at this point, and we need to rethink them entirely? And sort of a corollary question would be about vaccination mandates or not for very young children. I know they're not fully the same question, but sort of part A and B, if you will.
So clearly, a lot of the public health guidelines have gotten the public confused. That's not necessarily a reason to rethink them. I think the public is also very tired of mask mandates and other requirements. And as cases are going down, governors around the country are sensing an opportunity to just throw these mask mandates aside. And they sense a political imperative because people are fed up, and they feel that they can justify it by the caseloads. But the CDC, as you mentioned, is saying not so fast. Cases are still really high in this country. I think we're still averaging about 140,000 new coronavirus cases a day. And while the numbers are dropping, they're really not anywhere they need to be for us to say that we have this pandemic under control and in a situation where we can live with the virus with minimal hospitalization and death.
And as far as children, again, even myself, I've been a bit confused as to what's doable, not doable at this point.
Right. So the confusion is understandable because federal authorities have gone back and forth. Yeah. The last group of Americans for whom the vaccine is not available are children under 5. And I know a lot of parents have been waiting to get their kids vaccinated, their young children, and the FDA was going to go ahead with considering the Pfizer vaccine for young children, even though there was some suggestion that the correct course should be 3 doses rather than 2. So the FDA was going to put that aside, recognizing that a lot of parents wanted their kids vaccinated, and they were going to take up the question of whether or not to approve the 2-dose regimen. Well, last week, the FDA reversed itself and said, guess what? Pfizer has some new data, and we're going to wait, after all, to see what the data show about a 3-course regimen. So sorry, parents, you're going to have to wait probably another couple of months before the FDA considers whether or not to give authorization to a vaccine for kids younger than 5. So it's confusing because there's been a lot of back and forth, but the bottom line is not yet. Parents are still going to have to wait a couple months.
Can we tell yet if the worst of COVID is behind us, or the Omicron variant will be followed by eventually the Omega variant, and then we move on, for all I know, to the Hebrew alphabet for the next? I mean, do the folks you speak to on a daily basis, I assume, have a sense of not so fast, it ain't done, or yeah, we think the worst is over? Do they know?
The short answer to that is no, they don't know.
All right.
But they express what I would call qualified optimism. And that is that cases are going in the right direction now, the right direction being down. The Omicron surge is behind us in the United States. We topped out at something like 800,000 cases a day. And now, as I mentioned, we're down to about 140 or 150,000. So the numbers are going in the right direction. Hospitalizations are also going down. But what we don't know is whether another variant will arise, and nobody has a crystal ball. There's no way to know that. So, while Dr. Fauci and Dr. Walensky and other people I talk to are optimistic, they are also cautious in saying that we really don't know what's going to happen next. So, fingers crossed that things stay the way they are and we don't get any new variants, and that we can move into what some people are calling the new normal, which will be a phase in which we learn to live with the virus and sort of coexist with it with minimal levels of hospitalization and death.
And this new normal, you think, is likely nationwide? I mean, even in places like New York, which is heavily masked, people are obviously weary of it. Are we collectively as a nation prepared to say, okay, there are going to be X number of cases, just as there are X number of people who die every year from the flu, and this is what we have to live with?
So I think we are prepared as a country to say that when we get to that level. Now, about 30,000 Americans die every year of flu.
Right.
In the past 2 years from coronavirus, 900,000 Americans have died. So the deaths from COVID-19 are still way out of whack. They are not anywhere comparable to the low levels that we see from influenza. But if they do drop and become comparable to flu, then I think, yes, public health experts will be able to say that we're in a post-pandemic phase, we're in an endemic phase, and this is just kind of the cost of life with the coronavirus, and it's not going to get much better than this.
You mentioned Dr. Fauci, who's obviously a polarizing figure for many. Is there any way of telling, is he likely to be an issue in this election year that we're in?
Well, Republicans are trying to make him an issue.
Yeah.
Trump Republicans are trying to make
Right.
him an issue. And a lot of them in hotly contested races are running ads attacking Dr. Fauci as a way to kind of gin up support from the Republican base. So he has become an issue. I would say they're trying to Nancy Pelosi-ize him. Republicans have gone after Nancy Pelosi for years as kind of their boogeyman, and now, they have this new boogeyman, Dr. Fauci. And it's interesting to me. I was talking to a Republican strategist, and he said that in a way, Fauci is sort of a proxy for the elites and the coastal dwellers, the establishment, all the things that populists like President Trump, former President Trump, are against. Right. That's what Fauci stands for. So he's kind of a stand-in for this anti-elite, anti-media, anti-establishment, anti-intellectual sentiment that Donald Trump tapped into when he was president.
And these seem to be folks who are unmoved by the fact that they are disproportionately among those who are dying from this disease. If they tend to be unvaccinated, I mean, it ain't rocket science. If you get vaccinated, you're likely to keep on living.
I know. I was in Ohio recently reporting a story about, polarization and about Dr. Fauci, and I was talking to some folks at a diner just to kind of get some, on the street sentiment. And a couple of older men that I talked to, both Republicans, both vaccinated, both Trump supporters, mentioned to me that there was another guy who used to come to the diner, and he would sit at his booth every day and boast about being unvaccinated.
Yeah.
And now he's dead from COVID-19. So
Exactly.
it is not rocket science. These vaccines do save lives. They have been, millions of people around the world, some 200 million Americans have been given coronavirus vaccines, have taken the shots, and we know that the death rates among the unvaccinated are many, many times higher than those among vaccinated people.
Absolutely.
So get your vaccine.
Indeed. We have roughly a minute left. Can I ask you about the departure of Dr. Eric Lander as the president's science
Yes.
advisor? How significant a development is this? It seems to me also that the president is lagging in filling some of these key science and health positions, no? And is that because he's not getting his nominees approved, or he's not nominating?
Well, just yesterday, Dr. Robert Califf was confirmed
Right.
by the Senate for the position of FDA commissioner. He was being held up, so that is at least something that Biden has achieved. He waited a whole year to nominate an FDA commissioner. The departure of Eric Lander as science advisor is very significant. He was a brilliant researcher, but by all accounts, not a very good manager, someone who bullied and demeaned his staff. And he resigned, but he was in effect forced out. But he was also behind a lot of really important programs that are high priorities for the president, including his Cancer Moonshot Initiative and a pandemic preparedness initiative. And he was also involved in the search to fill another vacant position, the position of NIH director, which is vacant now that Dr. Francis Collins, the longtime director, has stepped down. So I think Lander had to go because the president has said he won't tolerate disrespectful behavior among his staff, but it does leave a hole.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheryl Gay Stolberg from Washington, and for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Clyde Haberman. Thank you.